They keep coming back and issuing demands where they're increasing the legal fees every time. And, there's no one to deal with.
Yeah.
Yes.
If a company,
it's outrageous.
If a company inconveniences you through wrongful billing, Steve, is there, as Wellington City Council is suggesting, a chance of compensation?
Well, certainly. If I was involved, I would be seeking compensation. I'd want a written apology. I'd want any records cleared up and clarified immediately. And one would be entitled to compensation. If it's caused you stress, heartache and financial costs, not to mention impacting on your reputation, I'd be writing to them quite a firm letter saying, well, you'd be well advised to reimburse my client and put them back in the position they should be in.
But the issue is, Steve, is shouldn't Wilson, what happens to them? How can they, under false pretences, find somebody for a parking space that they don't own?
Exactly. It's using a document. Can you imagine if a normal citizen just laid claim to a portion of the roadway and started issuing parking tickets? The police would pursue them pretty quickly and say, well, you're trying to extort money from people on a dishonest basis. This bigger company seems to have been doing that. They weren't the first time, but if it was an administrative oversight. But once they were put on notice, they certainly had an obligation to follow that up. And from there, it's fundamentally dishonest.
Speaking of laying claim, one more thing. If signage is inadequate, if there is nothing displayed with reasonable prominence, Steve, to suggest you aren't allowed to park somewhere, can you park there?
Well, you should not, but on the other hand, it's incumbent on the authority or the personage endeavouring to enforce that right to notify you of it. So there's certainly a developed area of the law where one can say I wasn't properly informed, just as if speeding signs are occluded by trees. You have an arguable basis if the council hasn't fulfilled its obligation to tell me. It's a bit rough then to turn around and try and pursue me for something of which I was utterly oblivious. But if you're parking in private property, you can't go in and just park in somebody's front yard and say, well, you didn't tell me it was private, I didn't know, I've got liberty to do that. There's a balancing that has to occur.
Thank you, Steve. Steve Cullen on the panel. I couldn't see the speed signs, Your Honour. I was going so fast, the trees were all so close together. Now, before we go, local councils want central government to enact cat control legislation similar to the rules in place for dogs. Local bodies want to be given the opportunity to place greater restrictions on cats. Do we need cat control legislation, mandatory collars, desexing, microchipping?
Yes.
Yes.
There you go.
If they're already there for dogs, why aren't they there for cats?
What does microchipping achieve, do you think, for a cat if the worst owners won't do it?
Well, like the first story, it lets you get in the building and also access the fridge.
That's correct. In humans, that's correct. All right, so you both say we've got too many cats.
Yes, and we know what cats do when they're out wandering and doing what they shouldn't be doing, so we'd rather actually manage it, yeah.
Do you think we ever are going to manage it, even though you're in support of this? Do you think it's ever going to work?
It's about awareness and having conversations and people, if I think about what we've done, our last Moggy died and we made a decision that, no, we didn't need to get another cat. So, perhaps if things changed and we did want another cat and you had to put in the microchip, then that's what we'd do. But that is what people are making decisions now about things that they really care about.
Okay.
Yep, I'm with that.
Please stop calling it synthetic cannabis. A number of people actually texting in this regard. They are a range of synthetic chemicals. That's all we've got time for. John Barnett, thank you for your company today.
Thank you.
Amanda Miller, thank you for yours as well.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure to see both of you. And Checkpoint with John Campbell coming right up. See you tomorrow, everybody.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight on Checkpoint, is a shortage of ICU beds at the Southern DHB a crisis? And are people dying as a result? We hear from 3 Dunedin-based families tonight. Merv has had his heart bypass surgery postponed 7 times. Amber is 13 and severely disabled. Her spinal surgery was postponed after she'd been prepared for theatre. And the family of 68-year-old Owen Glover say he died waiting for heart surgery after his operation was postponed 4 times. What's going on? The families speak and the Southern DHB responds. Also tonight, Boris Johnson heads to Australia, but not before promising New Zealand's at the top of the list for a bilateral trade deal. And Todd Barclay returns to Parliament.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanaho. People on the lowest incomes are now spending more than half their pay on housing costs. Government figures show the poorest are spending 51% of what they get on housing, up from 29% in 1990. Anusha Bradley reports.
The Ministry of Social Development's latest household incomes report shows housing affordability and quality for the poorest has worsened over the last few years. It finds 13% of children are living in cold, damp homes, which their families cannot afford to heat. The Social Development Minister, Anne Tolley, says that is why the government increased benefits for families with children last year and is committed to building more housing. She says most people are better off than they were in 2008, with median household incomes rising much faster than inflation and by 3% in real terms over the past year alone. Ko Anusha Bradley, aho.
The Dunedin families of 3 southern DHB patients say they've missed out on life-saving surgery several times because of a chronic bed shortage in the hospital's intensive care unit. Donna Ballantyne says her 68-year-old father, Owen Glover, died at his Mosgiel home alone while waiting for surgery after his appointment was postponed 4 times. Kelly Gibbs says her severely disabled teenage daughter Amber's surgery was cancelled as she was wheeled into theatre. And the family of Merv Telfer says his heart bypass surgery has just been postponed for the 7th time. The DHB's chief executive, Chris Fleming, says it's just increased the number of intensive care beds from 6 to 8, but that's not enough. The country's local councils will push the government for powers to control cats, including microchipping, desexing and registration. They narrowly passed a remit at the local government New Zealand annual meeting today, asking the government to finish its national cat management strategy so it can be implemented throughout the country. A Dunedin City Councillor, Aaron Hawkins, says the strategy could give councils the powers to better control cats to protect wildlife.
We're increasingly getting the message from our community that they want to be able to give effect to our ambitions as a predator-free nation, and we can't do that unless we address the issue of the impact cats have on our environment.
Aaron Hawkins, a Dunedin City Councillor. After admitting misleading work and income as a young mother, the Greens co-leader Materia Ture says she's been made aware of another woman in the same situation, but she won't be dobbing her in. While releasing the Greens Families package just over a week ago, Mrs Ture revealed she lied to receive more benefits while raising her daughter on her own. At Parliament this afternoon, she told reporters a woman down south raising a child and studying has flatmates she hasn't declared to work and income. Mrs Ture is refusing to identify the woman or notify the authorities.
I am supporting her in her choices to be the best possible mother that she can be and find the best possible path of welfare that she can. And I will never condemn a beneficiary for working as hard as they can to put food on the table and a roof over their head.
Materia Ture. The state of emergency has been lifted in Christchurch and Banks Peninsula. The city's mayor, Leanne Dalzell, says the immediate dangers posed by the significant rainfall and abnormally high tides have now passed. Ms Dalzell says the council is still monitoring river levels, tides and the weather forecast closely to ensure it's ready to react if needed. She says the forecast of more rain from Thursday means the situation is very changeable. In Britain, a House of Lords investigation into the impact of leaving the EU will have on animal welfare predicts farmers could be sucked into a race to the bottom as they struggle to compete with exporters such as New Zealand. The Energy and Environment Committee is warning that deals with countries with lower standards could see British farmers resist improvements to animal welfare rules. The chair of the committee, Lord Teverson, says the farmers would be in a difficult bind.
Producing animals for export and for meat in Australia, in America, in New Zealand is so much cheaper because of the space that they have than it is here. And welfare standards are nothing like the leading globally ones that we have here in the United Kingdom. So British farmers can be undercut.
Lord Teverson. It's 5:04. To sport, and the New Zealand NBA basketballer Steven Adams is being linked with a move to the New York Knicks. Reports in the United States suggest the Oklahoma City Thunder are looking to trade Adams as part of a deal to attract Knicks star Carmelo Anthony. Matt Chatterton reports.
The 24-year-old Adams was picked up by the Thunder in the 2013 NBA draft and last year re-signed on a 4-year deal worth $140 million. The American sports website The Ringer says the Thunder are keen to sign Carmelo Anthony, a 10-time NBA All-Star, but for the deal to happen would need to trade one or possibly more of their players to free up salary cap space. The Oklahoma City Thunder have had a busy off-season, acquiring Indiana Pacers star Paul George to partner this year's NBA Most Valuable Player Russell Westbrook, as they try to build a roster capable of beating the dominant Golden State Warriors in the NBA's Western Conference. This is Matt Chatterton.
The Silver Ferns netball captain Katrina Grant has re-signed with the Central Pulse for another year. The long-serving Grant was buoyed by the franchise's success this year after they made the playoffs for the first time in their 10-year history. The Canberra forward and former Kiwis Rugby League international Sia Soliola faces a potentially season-ending suspension over his sickening hit on Melbourne star Billy Slater. Soliola has lodged an early guilty plea and will go before the NRL judiciary tonight. That's the news.
Britain welcoming Kiwis.
New Zealand is one of the great exporters of human capital to the UK, and we massively value it.
But how much does New Zealand need foreigners?
Back in February, I advertised for some staff, and I had 50 replies. 48 of them were immigrants on visas.
These people coming in from overseas bring a wealth of experience and train our Kiwis.
Comings and goings. Guy Aspinall and Susie Ferguson Morning Reports, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, the Grant Mapping Project, examining the disparities in charitable funding and whether some of our most needy are falling through the cracks. And after 10, a brave film by 8 Māori filmmakers taking on the complex issue of child abuse. And Graham Downs pays tribute to the godfather of the Dunedin sound, the late Roy Colbert. Join me, Lynn Freeman, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula. A few showers clearing tomorrow afternoon. Waikato to Taranaki, including Bay of Plenty and the central high country. Mainly fine, isolated showers clearing most places this evening, but remaining about the west coast through tomorrow. Whanganui and Manawatu, also Gisborne to Wairarapa. Mainly fine apart from the odd shower about Gisborne until tonight. Horowhenua, Kapiti, Wellington, Nelson and Marlborough, fine apart from isolated showers tomorrow evening. Canterbury and Otago, fine today, high cloud tomorrow with scattered rain from afternoon, mainly about the high country. Pulatu Fiordland, periods of rain with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms south of the glaciers tomorrow afternoon. Southland, scattered showers clearing after dark but returning tomorrow afternoon. And the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with occasional drizzle. It is 8 minutes past 5 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you so much, Katrina. Coming up on the program tonight, and thank you everyone for being with us, Boris Johnson and Todd Barclay both visit Wellington. The latest on the flooding in the south, and the country's councils are calling on the government to give them extra powers to protect wildlife from cats, including possibly registration. But we begin tonight in the intensive care unit of Dunedin Hospital. There are 8 ICU beds in the hospital, up from 6 until recently, and it's not enough. And that's what you're about to hear the head of the Southern DHB tell us. Coming up, an interview with Chris Fleming, in which he says, and I quote, "Currently we do not have enough ICU beds." What that means is that patients who might otherwise be able to have surgery, heart surgery for example, with a cardiothoracic team which is ready and able to operate, gets delayed because there aren't ICU beds for post-operative care. This issue has come to a head with the Southern DHB, which covers Otago, Southland and a region including Queenstown, Dunedin and Invercargill. The daughter of a patient whose heart surgery has repeatedly been postponed went to the Otago Daily Times and to Facebook. That provoked a series of families to come forward making similar complaints. Checkpoint has conducted its own investigation, speaking to families, to staff at the DHB who say they don't have enough ICU beds to keep up, and to the head of the DHB who agrees with them. We begin with Bridget Telfer and the story of her father Merv, whose operations were repeatedly postponed, including after he'd been admitted for the surgery.
He's actually spent 2 separate nights in hospital waiting for an operation the following morning. And the last time he got as far as he was due to have surgery at 7 a.m, my mum had gone in at 6 a.m. and he had the stockings on, the gown on, he'd even had the lubricant put up his nose for where the tubes get put up. And at 7:30, they were sitting around going, oh, they must be running late, so I wonder why they haven't come and got me. And then at 7:30, the cardiac team came around really apologetic, saying, look, I'm really sorry, but there's just no free beds in ICU, and we'll have to send you home, and hopefully we can do it next week. And so as of yesterday, he has been postponed 7 times.
7 times, and he was told in May he would need an urgent double bypass.
16th of May, he was told it was urgent, and they hoped to have it done in 30 days. And what he was told was that, yes, he definitely needs a heart valve replacement. He definitely needs a double bypass, but once they get in, it could be triple, it could be quadruple, they won't actually know, and that his arteries were 80% blocked.
OK, so he was told that in May, and since then it's been postponed 7 times, including twice after he was admitted to hospital.
Yep. Which, as you can imagine, it's not the kind of operation where you're getting a toenail pulled. Like, for the family and especially for the patient, like, it's quite a big operation. I'm sure it's quite scary when you're the one thinking of what actually happens to you in that operation. And so, yeah, to get right to that stage, it's like terrible, and it's really frustrating. And this is done to patients who, you know, you try not to stress them out because of risk of stroke or a heart attack or whatever.
Bridget, can I interrupt there? Sorry, you say patients plural, so have you heard of this happening to other people?
There's lots of people. Like, the whole reason why I initially did my rant on the ODT, which is a local paper Facebook page, is because it wasn't really to go, oh, woe is me, and bump my father up the list. In fact, we were specifically said that's not what our intention was, that we know how hard it is waiting on the list, and we didn't want to queue jump or push anybody off. But, look, I've received, well, there's many comments on the Facebook post itself of people in the same position, and not just for cardiac, for lots of different surgeries. And the thing that really highlighted it to me and why I really wanted to push the story further is not just for my father, but, you know, I have people, elderly people, messaging me whose husbands perhaps are waiting for surgery, and they said that they're so glad the story's out because they're literally too afraid to speak out in case they're bumped further down the list. They're worried about the repercussions, and I just think that's dreadful.
Now, this is not about the ability of the cardiac team to perform the surgery or otherwise. It's, in fact, it seems, about the number of beds in ICU to care for people after their surgery. Is that your understanding of what the issue is?
Yeah, it is. And the intensive care ward is actually pretty small. And they used to have 2 dedicated beds in ICU for cardiac patients specifically, and that's no longer the case. They don't have any designated beds. So they aim to do, well, this is my understanding, and I'm not an expert, but, you know, I know people that work at the hospital and I've asked around. So my understanding is they aim to do 6 cardiac operations a week. And last week, for instance, they did 1. So you only need a few weeks like that, and you can imagine the backlog. It just doesn't, it's like this endless, bottomless pit.
Bridget, in the meantime, while all of this is going on, your dad gets his letter in May stating an urgent case for bypass surgery and possibly more. You're now looking at the surgery after 7 delays taking place in August. Do you worry about your dad's health in the meantime?
I do, in the fact that, you know, well, him and all of them really, that they are ticking time bombs. There was one woman that actually posted on my Facebook page. Her father had been postponed 3 times and actually died. So, like, it's a really serious problem. And, you know, I know that my father is beginning, the number of times that he's been postponed, he's beginning to have sleepless nights worrying. And he worries about my mum, who also hasn't been well lately. So, you know, it's just this compounding problem. So, yeah, definitely, you know, he's my dad, and but, you know, I still come back to the point that I'm fighting this and speaking up for my father, but for husbands and fathers and brothers and uncles, like it's much bigger than just my dad.
Bridget Telfer talking about her father, Merv, but you will also have heard Bridget say she's been told people have died after repeated delays to their surgery. Well, Donna Ballantyne says her father, Owen Glover, is one of them. He was 68 years old. Owen lived in Dunedin, but for reasons Donna doesn't understand, he was being transferred to Canterbury. As with Merv, there were repeated delays to Owen's surgery.
So they made and cancelled 4 appointments. The 5th one was supposed to be towards the end of August last year. Unfortunately, he died at the end of the first week of August, so he didn't make his so-called confirmed surgery. And, you know, like I said, he was 68, you know, like I just said...
And what did he die of, Donna?
He died of heart related. Basically, his heart just gave up and stopped and just couldn't do it anymore, you know.
And how many times had his appointment been cancelled or delayed or deferred?
4 times.
And were you given an explanation each time as to why that had happened?
No, not specifically. They just kept, they just kept sending letters saying, unfortunately, your surgery has been, delayed or put off or whatever. It will now be happening on whatever date, But yeah, 4 times it was cancelled.
And the first appointment was February that was cancelled?
Yeah, and then March, and then April, and then July.
And then he died in August?
And then he died at the beginning of August, and they had said that he would definitely be in towards the end of August for the surgery, but of course, obviously, we didn't get that far. Honestly, I don't have any faith in the health system in this country at all.
That's Donna Ballantyne. Now, her 68-year-old father lived alone, but the family kept a close eye on him. When he didn't return calls and texts, the alarm was raised, and Donna's brother-in-law raced over to his house.
When he pulled up outside, Dad's car was outside. His lights were going, his heater was going in his wee flat, and he was bashing on the door and walking around the house and, couldn't, stir him up or couldn't find him or whatever. So in the end, he had a ranch slider, so in the end he took, he could lift up the ranch slider and take it off the track thing. He took the door off the track and went in and was yelling out and couldn't find him, and walked into the bathroom and then, walked through into his bedroom, and he was dead on, just dead on the floor. And I just said to Pip, the thing, not only is the cancellation of all the surgeries bloody frustrating. I mean, obviously it's come to the worst, scenario occurred, obviously. But he obviously, he died alone, because they wouldn't get their shit together, so to speak, and sort it out. And it's just, yeah.
It's Donna Ballantyne talking about her father, Owen. It's not only heart surgery that's being delayed. Kelly Gibbs has a 13-year-old daughter, Amber, who is severely disabled.
Amber's got a lot of things wrong with her. She's actually got microcephaly, scoliosis, cerebral palsy, epilepsy, developmental delay, and she has asthma.
But Amber was being treated for her curved spine. It was surgery that had the capacity to dramatically improve her quality of life. She was in hospital, and her entire family, including grandparents, had come to support her and to look after the other children in the family. We
stayed in the hospital on the 9th of July. We met with the surgeon on the 9th of July, and he discussed the surgery procedure with us again. And it was really an anxious time for us. My father and my stepmother had booked 10 nights accommodation to come up and stay in Dunedin. They live in Invercargill. My husband took 2 weeks off work. My mother took a week off work. We had been so anxious leading up to the surgery, and the day was finally coming. So we were kind of very anxious, but also looking forward to the surgery helping my daughter. And then on the 10th of July, the morning of, we had to wash Amber with surgical soap, which is some yellow soap, to stop infection, on her body, sort of to cleanse her body sort of thing. And then we had her all gowned up, ready to go, and the next minute the surgeon comes into the room and says to us, we're sorry, but the surgery has to be postponed because a young guy who's had a heart attack has taken Amber's bed in ICU and they're needing a triple bypass.
Right, so I'm so sorry to interrupt. So it wasn't that your surgeon was involved in the care of the other patient, it was that Amber's bed in ICU for post-operative care had gone?
Yeah.
And your surgeon would still have been able to do the operation?
Yes.
And what did your surgeon say about his or her inability to do the operation because Amber's bed in ICU had been taken?
There was no care for Amber afterwards and they couldn't proceed with the surgery.
So that's Amber's mum, Kelly Gibbs. We wanted to talk to the Health Minister about this, but Jonathan Coleman referred us to the Southern DHB itself, and Chris Fleming was available. I began by asking the Chief Executive of the Southern DHB how many ICU beds they do actually have.
8 ICU beds, and that's an increase. Recently we increased it from 6 to 8.
Right, and that was an increase in response to the fact that 6 wasn't anywhere near enough, right?
Well, about a couple of years ago, the issue about the service that was being able to be provided out of our ICU, the capacity and the constraints in our ICU was raised, and so the organisation has been along a pathway where we have made significant commitments. We've initially increased the ICU to 8, but we've also recently commenced a redevelopment of the facility, which is going to take it up to 10.
OK, when will it be 10 by?
The construction phase is expected to finish in August 2018.
Right, so it's gone from 6 to 8, and in roughly 13 months from now, it will be at 10.
Yes.
Is that enough?
Look, in the medium term, it will be enough in the medium term, but we are also obviously going through the redevelopment of Dunedin Hospital and the business case.
That's a theoretical redevelopment, isn't it? It's not happening, is it?
No, the indicative business case is being considered currently.
And when will that be formally finalised?
The business case?
Yes.
Or
the business case. My understanding is that it's not until the end of 2018.
The detailed business case won't be completed till the end of 2018. That's right.
Right, OK. So if one is relying on the detailed business case to give you new ICU beds, you wouldn't hold your breath, would you?
I will hold my breath because I know that we are going to redevelop Dunedin Hospital. It is much needed, but we have the 10-bed capacity for the foreseeable future.
10 or 8?
As I said, 8 until August 18, 10 from August 18.
Right, so at the moment it's 8 and that's gone up from 6?
Yes.
OK, Waikato DHB has 16. Their population is 400,000, your population is 319,000.
Yes.
So you have half the number of beds that they have, but 80% of their population. You simply don't have enough ICU beds, do you?
Currently we do not have enough ICU beds, absolutely.
And how has that been allowed to arise?
Look, I think in terms of over the longer term, we should have been doing planning for the redevelopment of our facilities. It should have started much earlier than it has, but we are on the pathway now.
Right. It should have started much earlier than it has.
Absolutely.
And what has happened in the interim? Have people died because they couldn't get operations? Not because the surgeons weren't available, not because the theatres weren't available, but the post-operative care in ICU denied them the care they should have had?
I believe that patients' care has been delayed as a consequence of delaying cases because of lack of ICU capacity. We do not start elective cardiac cases in the event that there is not a known ICU bed available.
It's not only cardiac, is it? It's actually all serious surgery that requires ICU treatment afterwards.
Absolutely. There is pressure on ICU. There's pressure on ICU and HDU capacity in terms of making sure we're providing services in a timely way. Take the case that has raised the interest in the media recently. The cancellation, the number of times his case has been cancelled is terrible.
It's terrible.
I feel awful about it, but on a day-by-day basis, I must empower my clinicians to make decisions that are right on the day. So I do apologise to the patient because the number of cancellations is just not acceptable.
Right. So your position is that the number of cancellations is not acceptable. Your ICU is not big enough. You are simply not able to get people through at the speed with which you would like because there aren't enough beds for them on the other side. And the solution to this is not going to be available until the end of next year.
Well, no, as I said, we've already increased it, and we are looking in to see whether there's an ability to increase it further in an interim. But the physical.
So you are looking at another increase.
We're presently looking to see whether we can increase it by an extra bed in the current constraint. But we also need to make sure that the facility is appropriate, that we can staff it appropriately, and that we are supporting both patients and staff to optimise the care.
This is still not satisfactory, is it? It's still not as you would have it, is it?
With the necessity to cancel cases because of lack of ICU beds, no, we need to continue to do better, and we are striving for that.
Are you aware of people who have died whilst waiting for surgery that they weren't able to have because there weren't ICU beds available?
I am not aware of deaths that are attributable to the lack of ICU capacity, but I'm not a clinical person, so I would need to come back in terms of checking with my chief medical officer.
Do you transfer people to Canterbury, for example, because there aren't ICU beds available for post-operative care?
We indeed transfer patients to Canterbury, and Canterbury at times transfers patients to us because ICU capacity is used as a network across the country.
One final question. When will your ICU bed numbers be what you would hope they would be?
They will be at the level that we have signed off by August
2018. We just lost the last second, I think, of that interview. So Chris Fleming, the CEO of the Southern DHB, saying they will be at the levels that they would like by August 2018. They are currently half the levels that they are in Waikato. Dunedin has 80% of Waikato's population. Sorry, the DHB area has 80% of their population. We'd love your feedback, especially if you've been waiting for surgery in the Southern DHB. That's Dunedin Hospital that we're talking about here. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook Checkpoint with John Campbell, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. And we will have more on this story after 6 o'clock tonight, 5:27. Well, the British Foreign Secretary has been in New Zealand talking about a more outwards-looking Britain. He's also faced questions about internal political ructions back home. Boris Johnson has been touring the Asia-Pacific region. He's still doing so, saying his country wants to rediscover relationships with countries like New Zealand as Britain starts to negotiate its withdrawal from the European Union. Our political editor, Jane Patterson, is covering his visit.
Flanked by the Foreign Minister Jerry Brownlee at a media conference at Parliament this morning, Boris Johnson said Brexit is not, was not and will not be about Britain turning away from the world.
But it is also about rediscovering and intensifying friendships and partnerships around the world.
Mr Johnson reaffirmed his promise New Zealand would be near the top of the list for a bilateral trade deal with Britain. Jerry Brownlee was asked whether Britain would be at the top of New Zealand's list, given the range of other deals this country is pursuing.
And we've got big capacity to deal with those because we've got a bureaucracy now that's well used to taking care of all of the detail that goes into any free trade agreement. One of the things that we have most got an interest in is the both meat and butter quotas that we have into the EU. A lot of that does go into Europe, into Britain.
When asked about the future of ancestral visas and access for young New Zealanders wanting to go to Britain for their OE, Mr Johnson said Britain does want to have control of its own borders.
That does not mean that we are in any way going to make life more difficult for New Zealanders. On the contrary, we massively value, we love Kiwis coming to our country.
Really?
It's
tragic.
dim. They're very...
You know, they eat so many berries when they crash.
They can't get lifts off. They just fall to the ground.
That's a sort of anti-obesity campaign you could run with that one, couldn't you?
That's true. Part of Mr Johnson's day was spent at Zealandia, accompanied by the Conservation Minister Maggie Barry. After their wander around the wildlife sanctuary, he and Ms Barry talked to reporters.
Minister, thank you very much for having me here on this important anniversary day of your campaign of slaughter of rats and possums and stoats.
Mr Johnson then took a stock take of the bird life he'd seen.
I've heard and seen a kaka.
Yes.
I've seen a takahe.
You have.
I have handled a tuatara. Tuatara.
Magnificent.
I've handled a tuatara, and I have heard a lot about the kakapo, though I have not seen a kakapo.
But we'll show you the video later.
While Mr Johnson was busy reigniting international friendships, his Prime Minister Theresa May continues to be under pressure after a narrow win in June's snap election, a result he briefly alluded to.
Let's be clear, the election did not evolve entirely in the way that the government had hoped or would have wanted. Okay, I'm going to put that out there. But the Labour Party did not win.
The former London mayor was then asked to rule out a tilt at the leadership.
What the British people want to see is us getting on with the job, and they see no vacancy, nor do they see any need for any more political kerfuffle.
Mr Johnson is now headed to Australia. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
29 to 6, coming up on Checkpoint, the country's mayors and councillors vote in favour of asking the government for powers to control cats, including microchipping, desexing and registration. Todd Barclay returns to Parliament, and nearly 60 flood-hit Christchurch residents will have to find somewhere else to live because their properties are potentially contaminated with raw sewage. Plus, we have a pig's eye view inside a farrowing crate. All of that and more coming up before 6. But first of all, Katrina Batten with the headlines.
3 families have told Checkpoint chronic bed shortages at Dunedin Hospital's intensive care unit mean their relatives have missed life-saving surgery several times. The Southern DHB's Chief Executive, Chris Fleming, says the hospital has increased the number of intensive care beds from 6 to 8, but he acknowledges more are needed. New figures from the government reveal the poorest New Zealanders pay more than half what they earn on housing. The Social Development Ministry's latest household incomes report shows between a third and one half of children in hardship come from working families. Local councils will be asking the government for powers to control cats, including microchipping, desexing and registration. Mayors and councillors say they need to control cats to better protect wildlife and voted narrowly to seek more power at the local government annual meeting in Auckland this afternoon. Little over a week after admitting she lied to work and income as a young mother, the Greens co-leader Materia Ture has raised the case of another woman who says she says also has flatmates she hasn't declared to work and income. But Mrs Ture says she won't be identifying the woman to authorities. The state of emergency has been lifted in Christchurch and Banks Peninsula. Christchurch Mayor Leanne Dalzell says the immediate dangers from floodwaters have passed, but she says staff are keeping a close eye on further rain forecast from Thursday and will be ready to react if needed. The father on trial over the fatal shooting of his 2-year-old daughter says he planned to get rid of a sawn-off shotgun on the morning of the killing. Gustav Otto Samft has been giving evidence in the High Court in Auckland, where he's pleaded not guilty to the manslaughter of his daughter. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6 with more news and weather.
Thank you very much, Katrina. Let's turn to business news now and cross to Wellington. We're beaming in via the wonders of modern gizmos as Giles Beckford, our business editor. And Giles, there are signs the commercial property sector is nearing its peak. How do people know this?
Well, people get a little bit more defensive. Certainly some of the analysts of the sector have been looking at it, been looking at vacancy rates. They look at the yield, the return that investment companies have been getting and the prices that are being paid. Throw that all together and the companies themselves are obviously now starting to just get a little bit more wary. We've seen that today from one property investment company called Argosy, where at its annual meeting it's just tweaked its investment strategy slightly, and what it's doing is that it will invest slightly more into industrial property where there is still a shortage and there's strong demand and prices are still they're reasonable, should we say, in the sort of relative strength of things for the sector. They're going to ease back on their investments in the office sector. They're going to stay where they are in retail, and they're also looking at what they call core properties as opposed to value-added properties. Now, core properties are properties that you hold on to for quite a while, in their case more than 10 years, strong tenancy, strong rental returns. value added you have to do a little bit more work on. You may get a good return, but it's in a time when the sector is perhaps starting to feel the pressures. They're the ones where you actually don't want to be too exposed to. Now, the second sign that we've seen today is from a company called the Retail Property Group. Now, this was a company which had plans to do a backdoor listing onto the stock exchange. This is basically where you find a company that's listed on the stock exchange. It's doing nothing. It's just a shell. In this case, it was a company called Bethune's Investments. And the Retail Property Group was looking at using this as an easy way to get onto the exchange. It was touting its investments and its assets to potential investors. And the feedback that it got from them was that, well, you may have put a price tag of somewhere around $575 million on your portfolio, but quite frankly, we don't think it's worth that, and we wouldn't be investing to support that sort of valuations that you want. The consequence of that is that the Retail Property Group, which has got three commercial retail town centre developments in Auckland and one in Tauranga, it's decided to pull the plug on the proposal for the time being, at least. It says until after the election. And that just raises another flag, I think, which is that the closer we get to the election, the more likely that businesses will be just a little bit reluctant to commit themselves until they see the colour of the next government. And that will probably lead to a little bit of slowness in activity and certainly a little bit of cautiousness about where people put their money.
Giles Beckford looking at the commercial property sector. Thank you, Giles. What happened on the markets today?
Another solid day for the stock exchange. Our share market up 30 points. That's about 0.4% to 7713. That's just 20 points off a record high. The New Zealand dollar is a bit becalmed at the moment. 74.4 US cents and 93.7 Australian.
Thanks, Giles. Really appreciate it. Giles Beckford, our business editor. Coming up, animals, cats and how to control them, and life inside a sow crate. But first, the embattled Clutha Southland MP Todd Barclay has made a low-key return to Parliament following allegations he secretly recorded one of his electorate staffers. The National MP has been noticeably absent from Wellington and has cancelled public appearances since announcing last month he would not seek re-election in September in the wake of the recording controversy. Today he returned to Parliament but is still refusing to speak to media. Here's our political reporter Demelza Leslie.
Todd Barclay has kept a low profile since early June, leading to questions about what he's been doing while still receiving his $165,000 MP's salary. As he arrived at caucus this morning, he casually walked past the waiting media with a smile, but refused to stop and answer any questions. Todd. The Prime Minister, Bill English, also declined to talk on the matter. The Labour leader, Andrew Little, says that's a disgrace.
He's turned up, that's at least a good thing. He's on the public payroll, he should be seen to be doing something for it. Well, certainly the Prime Minister should be answering questions on his handling of the whole matter.
The police recently launched a fresh investigation into the taping allegations after new information came to light through the media. This afternoon, on his way into Parliament, Bill English told reporters Mr Barclay has been doing his job.
I don't track the MPs, what they do day to day.
Shouldn't you track this guy though?
No, I don't see any reason to. He represents his constituents. He's got constituents there to whom he's accountable.
During question time, the New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters attempted to quiz Mr English on what he knew about what happened in Mr Barclay's electorate office in Gore.
Why did he feel the need to interfere in an employment dispute between another MP and a staffer?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr Speaker, I have no responsibility for that matter.
Order. Why on the Barclay issue was he in constant communication with Guinness Dixon over a long period of time?
Again, insofar as there may be Prime Minister responsible, the Right Honourable Prime Minister. Speaker, I have no comment to make on that.
Why does he keep changing his story on the Barclay matter?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr Speaker, I haven't.
The Labour MP Chris Hipkins was also stonewalled by the Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I've made extensive comment on those matters already. Mr Speaker, I've commented extensively on that. Prime Minister. Speaker, I have no responsibility for that matter.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Prime Minister can address one or other. Mr Speaker, the matter has been covered extensively by a 10-month police investigation.
Nominations for National Party candidates to replace Mr Barclay in Clutha Southland closed a week ago, but the party will not confirm the number of nominees or any names until the final selection meeting next month. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Demelza Leslie.
The country's councils are calling on the government to give them extra powers to protect wildlife from cats, including microchipping, desexing and registration. The controversial remit scraped through with just 51% of the vote at the local government New Zealand annual general meeting today. Councils also reiterated their need for more money to build tourism facilities and will now lobby the government to return a share of GST to the region in which it is generated. Our local government reporter Michael Kropp has the story.
First domesticated 10,000 years ago, worshipped by the ancient Egyptians, the most shared animal on the internet. Cats are swift, efficient hunters, and while that's good for controlling rats and mice, it's devastating for New Zealand's native and protected wildlife, such as birds and geckos, especially when those cats are wild. Now, a slim majority of councils want the government to give them the power to register, microchip and desex cats. Councillor Aaron Hawkins presented the remit on behalf of the Dunedin City Council.
We're increasingly getting the message from our community that they want to be able to give effect to our ambitions as a predator-free nation, and we can't do that unless we address the issue of the impact cats have on our environment.
Local bodies have the power to control dogs and their behaviour, but they only have jurisdiction over cats when they become a health risk. While the remit presented at the meeting acknowledged the companion role of animals, or more simply, their beloved place in the home and on people's knees, it says they're a danger to wildlife. Invercargill's Mayor Tim Shadbolt says cats have been a major problem in his city, but dealing with it without government support has been tricky.
It started when we had to develop a strategy, which we always do in local government, and our strategy was that you would only allow 2 cats in a domestic house. Then a lady turned up with 27 cats.
The councils will now lobby the government to finish its national cat management strategy, which Mr Shadbolt says would help.
It gives us the authority to take action on it once we've got a policy, and it's been through several court cases now, so it's been quite well defined that local government does have the authority not to own wild animals, but to control them.
A Wellington City Councillor, Iona Pannett, who is a strong advocate for stricter rules on cats, is glad the vote passed. However, Auckland's Mayor Phil Goff says his council abstained from the vote because they're not sure what it would mean for the 500,000 cats in the city.
We are in favour of practical measures to protect native bird life. We're not in favour of bureaucratic measures that might involve millions of dollars of council time and energy, but doesn't achieve the objectives that we set out to achieve.
Despite the support, local government New Zealand's new president, elected today, Dunedin's Mayor Dave Cull, says he doubts the government or any other party wants to get bogged down in a debate on controlling cats this side of the general election in September. For Checkpoint, Michael Kropp.
Nearly 60 flood-hit households in Christchurch are having to find somewhere else to live because their properties are potentially contaminated with raw sewage. Health authorities say the floodwaters have soaked the property's carpets or made the foundations damp, making them unsafe to live in. Colin Young visited some of those affected.
Kieran Maguire demonstrates just how waterlogged the carpets in his Beckenham rental property are after floodwaters breached the floorboards at the weekend.
This is the main area here, and then it just sort of spreads out into each bedroom. So it was actually redone when the floods happened 3 years ago. I think this place was badly done, so they re-carpeted everything. They'll have to go again, I think.
Kieran and his partner are now staying with a friend and don't know how long it will be before it's safe for them to return. He's glad they managed to save their belongings before the water made its way in.
We got everything up off the floor and anything, couches and beds and stuff. We were able to prop up on books just to get it off the carpet. So
good thinking with the books. I hadn't have thought of that one. So that did the trick?
Yeah. Anyway, as long as it didn't get any higher than the books, yeah, it did the trick. So.
How high off the carpet did you manage to get your couch and your beds?
3 or 4 books.
Probably saved you a bit of money there.
Yeah, hopefully.
That was good last minute thinking. Where did you come up with that one?
I don't know. It's amazing what you think of when you're panicking, so...
The clean-up isn't just happening inside. Council workers were out in force today, water blasting and shovelling the mountains of contaminated silt that is sticking to footpaths and roads like glue. I visited one home with all of its windows open, taking advantage of today's sun to dry out the carpet and furniture inside. The woman I talked to has come down from Napier to help her daughter and asked not to be named. She says while the water did not make it inside, it came close to the floorboards.
All I know is that it's damp. You can just feel the cold and the condensation.
Yeah.
So it's pretty horrible. So the sunshine is blessing. It's great here. Yeah. So as you can see, it's just got stuff everywhere and just trying to keep it as good as we can.
She's aware of the contamination risk and has already had expert cleaners around to sterilise the garage, which did get water through it and ruined 2 cars. She's also been helping to clear the toxic sludge left around the yard by the receding floodwaters.
You just don't want that contamination going backwards and forward. And then a 2-year-old, we're just lifting him into the car and out of the car. So he's only inside when he's here. So I've kind of got 3 sets of shoes. The sort of the bad stuff, the middle and the clean.
The Canterbury Medical Officer of Health, Dr Alistair Humphrey, says the damp conditions underneath houses like this pose their own set of health problems.
Even if the floodwaters didn't come above your floorboards, as they have done in at least 30 homes anyway, but even if they didn't, so they came below your floorboards, dampness can track up inside the walls of the house, and it can lead to mould, and mould will actually get worse once the floodwaters have receded.
Dr Humphrey is urging people to leave the clean-up to the professionals rather than trying to do it themselves.
You should be wearing proper respirators to protect you from any mould that may happen, and gloves and overalls to protect yourself from bacteria from the sewage and viruses. So it is a job that if you are insured, my advice would be talk to your insurers first rather than try doing it yourself. It's far safer to get a professional to deal with it.
While the city has had a chance to dry out today, further rain is forecast for Thursday, which authorities say may lead to further flooding in already affected areas. In Otago for Checkpoint, ko Konanyang Tene.
A man accused of the manslaughter of his 2-year-old daughter has told the court he planned to throw a sawn-off shotgun into a rubbish skip on the day his family moved from their home. Instead, he says the gun went off in his hands while he looked it over and tried to light a cigarette, killing his daughter, Amokura. Gustav Otto Svant has denied a charge of manslaughter and today entered the witness box to give evidence in his own defence. Edward Gay was in the High Court in Auckland.
Gustav Sanft said a friend who he knew as Black had hidden the gun at his home, but he hated guns and had wanted to get rid of it.
I thought to throw it in the creek behind my house. But then I thought the kids next door, they'll find it, or my kids will find it, because they sometimes like to jump over the fence and play in the creek. So then I thought I'd thought of handing it over to the police. But then I thought, what could I tell them? What if the gun was involved in something that I did not know about?
On the morning of the shooting, the 26-year-old and friends were packing up their home in Mangere, planning to move in with his partner's family in Henderson. He said his partner had left the children with him while she went to organise a rubbish skip.
I had no plan what to do with it. All I knew is we were moving out, and the skipping would be here. And that was my chance to get rid of it.
Mr. Sanft said he brought the gun outside to show his friends and look over it before tossing it in the skip. He said he asked a friend for a cigarette and a lighter, but before he lit it, the gun went off in his hands.
I can't remember which way I was holding the gun. I wasn't concentrating on the gun. All I remember is the bang.
Mr. Sanft said as soon as the gun went off, he knew his daughter was dead. He was asked by his lawyer, Phil Hamlin, if he pulled the trigger. There was a long pause before he answered.
My heart says no, but my mind is unsure.
Mr. Hamlin asked why he had told a police officer soon after that he had shot his daughter.
I was just trying not to lose myself, trying to recap what had happened, trying to figure out what it is that happened, and I couldn't get past that. I couldn't say that it was an accident, because how do you accidentally shoot a kid? Let alone my own child. How?
Police officers have also told the court that Mr Sanft told them Amakura had been playing up on the couch before the shot was fired, but Mr Sanft denied that.
Maybe I said I pulled the trigger. Yes. So that's what was logic to me. I must have. There's no other way that this could happen. But she definitely was not playing up. And even if she was, it wouldn't be a thing to me. She's my baby girl. Get away with anything.
The trial is due to end next week. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi ko Edward Gayahau.
An animal welfare group is launching New Zealand's first ever 360-degree virtual reality footage of pigs in farrowing crates. Save Animals from Exploitation is calling for a national ban on farrowing crates, saying they're cruel and inhumane. It's released the footage for the first time to coincide with the Pork Industry Board's AGM. Jessie Chang with this pig's eye view.
Pig farming like you've never seen before. It's footage that gives a viewer a 360-degree view inside a farrowing crate. The sow lies on bare metal, surrounded by bars that restrict her movement, while her piglet walks around her. It's dark and there's no natural light. For some Aucklanders, this was horrifying.
She should be out of it. Why she's in a cage? Wow. Wow. Screw this place. Looks like not a good time.
Oh, it's really sad. Do I have to look at it anymore?
Safe Campaign's director, Mandy Carter, says sows are placed in farrowing crates straight after giving birth. She says pigs are highly intelligent animals and it's frustrating for them to be enclosed in cages.
The problem with farrowing crates is that we are sticking animals in cages so small that they can't even turn around, and they are in these cages for 4 to 5 weeks at a time. We wouldn't do this to a dog, would we? There would be a massive outcry if people were to do that. So if we wouldn't do it to a pet dog, why would we do it to farm animals?
Ms Carter says the footage was secretly filmed on a pig factory farm in the Waikato this year. She says SAFE is calling for a nationwide ban on farrowing crates for pigs. 30%
of New Zealand farmers are already not using farrowing crates, and even the Government National Animal Welfare Advisory Committee has said that farrowing crates should be phased out, but there is no economic alternative at the moment, and that's where the clue comes in. It actually boils down to money. It's for profit for the pig industry that they're still keeping sows in these terrible conditions.
Ms Carter hopes the 360-degree footage will educate the public and prompt them to support SAFE's campaign.
Until now, we've just shown people here's some pig footage, but you can't really feel what it must be like to be one of those pigs. So now you have a pig's eye view. It's really fully immersive. Most people are never going to go onto a pig farm, and so now they can in virtual reality and actually judge for themselves, is this okay?
Julie Collins from the Ministry for Primary Industries says they've already put in new regulations to protect the welfare of pigs last week.
So there's 6 regulations. They look at the size of farrowing crates to make sure that they're appropriate. They look at making sure that there's dry lying areas for pigs, and they also look at rules around tail docking and castration.
Julie Collins, who is the Director of Biosecurity and Animal Welfare, says an independent review of farrowing crates in 2016 found there were no practical alternatives. But she says the ministry is continuing to look into other ways of caring for sows and their piglets. For these Aucklanders, however, the footage was enough for them to make up their minds.
It's much more distressing than I could ever have imagined. Just the look, the expression on the face of the mother, it's just heartbreaking. It's awful. It's worse than I thought.
And so do you think farrowing crates should be banned then?
I do.
In my point of view, of course, no one should be caged and they should be free to move. It's their right.
You would have to investigate if that is the accurate situation across the board and what situation that occurs in. But yeah, definitely not a pleasant time.
Do you think that farrowing crates should be banned?
Yes, definitely. That is so inhumane. It's awful.
For Checkpoint, Ko Jessie Chang, TNA.
The New Zealand Pork Industry Board, which has hosted their AGM over the last 2 days, says they stand by the independent review by the National Animal Welfare Advisory, which suggests that at the moment farrowing crates are best practice. The chairman of the board, Ian Carter, says it's inappropriate for SAFE to call for a ban on farrowing crates where there's no safer alternative for sows and their piglets. 4.5 to 6. The parents of a terminally ill British baby are preparing to spend their final moments with their son before his life support is turned off. After a long public campaign, Chris Gard and Connie Yates have abandoned their legal battle to take their 11-month-old baby, Charlie, from London's Great Ormond Street Hospital to the US for experimental treatment. From London, here's the BBC's Fergus Walsh.
The fight over Charlie Gard's future is over. This desperately sick little boy will now be allowed to die.
Justice for Charlie! Justice for Charlie!
After a hugely emotional hearing where his parents said they had agreed to let their son go, they emerged to face the world's media.
Our son is an absolute warrior and we could not be prouder of him and we will miss him terribly. His body, heart and soul may soon be gone, but his spirit will live on for eternity and he will make a difference to people's lives for years to come. We will make sure of that. We are now going to spend our last precious moments with our son Charlie, who unfortunately won't make his first birthday in just under 2 weeks' time.
Charlie has been in Great Ormond Street Hospital since October. He has a serious inherited condition, mitochondrial depletion syndrome. He cannot move, feed or breathe unaided. The central question in this case was whether nucleoside therapy could boost his muscle function. His parents raised £1.3 million for the treatment in the United States. That money will now go to a foundation in Charlie's name. But Great Ormond Street, backed by many independent experts, said the treatment was futile because Charlie had suffered catastrophic and irreversible brain damage. Because Charlie's parents and doctors could not agree, the matter went to the High Court. In April, the judge ruled that Charlie's suffering should end, his life support be withdrawn. Every legal appeal brought by Charlie's parents failed. Then came interventions from the Pope and Donald Trump, the latter tweeting an offer of help. This has been an extraordinary case, a battle over the fate of a baby boy that was fought out not just in court, but internationally. The judge said it was one of the pitfalls of social media that the watching world felt it right to have opinions without knowing the facts of the case. He said the court's paramount consideration had been Charlie's best interests at all times. The case came back to court when an American neurologist, Michio Hirano, claimed new evidence showed his nucleoside therapy could help Charlie. And last week he flew over to examine him. New MRI body scans were ordered. On Friday, Charlie's parents accepted these showed his muscle wasting was now so severe he was beyond help.
It's an incredibly brave decision by Charlie's parents. They have thought through for themselves what the new evidence shows, and they've reached a conclusion. Probably the judge would have reached the same. It's very brave for them to do it without waiting to hear what he had to say.
In court, Connie Yates said they would be haunted for the rest of their lives with the what if. What if their son had received the treatment months earlier? She said he had the potential to be a normal boy, but it was now too late.
To Charlie, we say, Mummy and Daddy, we love you so much. We always have and we always will, and we are so sorry that we couldn't save you.
The parents are now with Charlie in his final hours. Great Ormond Street said the agony, desolation and bravery of their decision humbled all who worked there.
That story from the BBC's Fergus Walsh. It's coming up to 6 o'clock. Katrina standing by with the 6 o'clock news. After 6 o'clock, we're going to go back to Otago and look at another of the big stories of this week, and that is the floodwaters down there. Are they clearing up? We will have that after 6, and we're going to look again at the ICU bed shortage at the DHB.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening, ko Katrina Batanaho. The daughter of a Dunedin man who had his heart bypass surgery postponed numerous times by the Southern District Health Board says people have died because of delays. Family members of 3 patients say they have missed out on life-saving surgery because of a chronic bed shortage in Dunedin Hospital's intensive care unit. The DHB says it's just increased the number of intensive care beds from 6 to 8, but acknowledges that's not enough. Bridget Telfer's father, Merv Telfer, had his bypass surgery postponed 7 times, despite being told in May the surgery was urgent. She told Checkpoint she worries about her father's health in the meantime.
They are ticking time bombs. There was one woman that her father had been postponed 3 times and actually died. So, it's a really serious problem. And, I know that my father is beginning, the number of times that he's been postponed, he's beginning to have sleepless nights worrying.
Bridget Telfer. The Social Development Minister says she's confident benefit and accommodation allowance increases are helping the poorest who are struggling with housing costs. The Ministry's Household Incomes report, just out, shows those on the lowest incomes are spending more than half their pay on housing, up from 29% in 1990. The report says the number of children living in poverty and material deprivation is falling, but income inequality remains unchanged. And Tolly says she's confident recent benefit increases are having an impact and will be picked up in future reports.
I get very frustrated that the data is so far behind because it doesn't even reflect last year's child hardship package. That still isn't reflected through in the data. So the increase to the benefits, for instance, which we know made a huge difference to a large number of families, none of that shows up in this data yet.
And Tolly. Mayors and councillors have narrowly voted in favour of asking the government for powers to control cats, including microchipping, desexing and registration. The remit, debated at the local Government New Zealand annual meeting today, passed with just 51% of the vote. Here's our local government reporter Michael Kropp.
Local bodies have the power to control dogs and their behaviour, but they can deal with cats only when they become a health risk. However, a slim majority wants greater controls on cats to protect native wildlife. The councils will now lobby the government to finish its national cat management strategy so it can be implemented throughout the country. They also voted in favour of the government returning a share of GST to the region in which it was generated to help build and maintain tourism infrastructure. In Auckland, Michael Cropper-Ho.
Nearly 60 flood-hit households in Christchurch are having to find somewhere else to live because their properties are potentially contaminated with raw sewage. Health authorities say the floodwaters have soaked carpets or affected foundations, making them unsafe to live in. Kieran Maguire and his partner are now staying with a friend and don't know how long it will be before it's safe for them to return to their house where the carpet is sodden. He says they're glad they managed to save their couch and bed before the water made its way in. The Ministry for Primary Industries has confirmed a cattle disease never before seen in New Zealand has been detected in a South Canterbury herd. Mycoplasma bovis doesn't infect humans or pose a food safety risk, but can seriously affect cattle with side effects including udder infection, pneumonia and arthritis. 14 cows out of the herd of 150 have tested positive for the disease, which requires close contact between cattle in order to spread, but can also infect milking equipment. The Ministry's Response Director, Jeff Gwynn, says they're not sure how the disease entered the country.
It is serious from a production and animal welfare perspective. It's not a human health risk and nor is it a food safety risk. We are carrying out tracing activities and movements of any possible risk goods into the farm concerned, but at this stage I can't speculate and the reality is we may never know for sure.
Jeff Gwynn says the focus is now on containing the spread of the disease and testing the remainder of the herd. A woman who was drunk and racially abused a Muslim woman in Huntly earlier this year has been sentenced to 12-month supervision. Megan Walton, a 27-year-old from Auckland, had previously pleaded guilty to 2 charges of assault and 1 charge of insulting behaviour. She was sentenced in the Palmerston North District Court today. The police say in February, Walton came out of the public toilets in Huntly and started racially abusing Muslim New Zealander Mepara Khan before throwing cans of alcohol at her and attempting to punch her twice. The court heard Walton was so intoxicated she didn't remember the incident. The charges were laid after Ms. Khan uploaded a video of the attack to social media. It's 6:05. To sport, and the Wallabies coach Michael Cheika is blaming a lack of fitness for the poor performance of the Australian sides in the Super Rugby competition. Cheika has instigated a tough fitness program as the Wallabies prepare for the upcoming Rugby Championship with their first game against the All Blacks in Sydney in just over 3 weeks. Australian sides failed to win any of their 26 games against New Zealand teams in the Super competition this year, and Cheika is adamant their torrid sessions are benefiting the squad.
You get a lot of respect for each other when you train hard and work hard with each other, and you can see already 3 or 4 days together in the different places, and now together here, just the first night last night and then in today, the way they work together, you start to feel the connections, you know what I mean? And that's what, at the end of the day, in the tough matches, that's what's going to get you by. It's the connection and the bond you've got as a team.
Michael Cheika. The New Zealand women's basketballers meet Chinese Taipei in Bangalore this evening with second place in the Asia Cup group up for grabs. In theory, second place will give them a better chance in the quarter-finals. The top four teams from the 8-team tournament qualify for next year's World Champs, and Tall Ferns coach Kennedy Kiriyama says the Asian teams are tough to overcome.
It's a very big game for both of us, but it is a very different game of basketball. Against Australia, and as great as they are, you know what they're going to do, and it comes down to your ability to stop them from doing that. But playing the Asian teams here, it is a very different game.
China and Australia are the top-ranked teams at the tournament. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Hamish McKeach, one of the stars of the New Zealand Ballet's national tour of Romeo and Juliet. Not that you'll see him on stage, but without him, there won't be any music to dance to. There's a window on the world of Karachi, overcoming the terror attacks that have isolated Pakistan in recent years, while this week's pundit is our largely libertarian thinker Eric Crampton from the New Zealand Initiative on Nights from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula. A few showers clearing tomorrow afternoon. Waikato to Taranaki, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, mainly fine, isolated showers clearing most places this evening, but remaining about the west coast through tomorrow. Whanganui and Manawatu, also Gisborne to Wairarapa. Fine apart from the odd shower about Gisborne until tonight. Horowhenua, Kapiti, Wellington, Nelson and Marlborough, fine apart from isolated showers tomorrow evening. Canterbury and Otago, fine today, high cloud tomorrow with scattered rain from afternoon, mainly about the high country. Bulla to Fiordland, periods of rain with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms south of the glaciers tomorrow afternoon. Southland, scattered showers clearing after dark but returning tomorrow afternoon, and the Chatham Islands mostly cloudy with occasional drizzle. It is 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you so much, Katrina Batten. We return now to our top story tonight about the situation at the intensive care unit at Dunedin Hospital. Families have told us urgent surgeries have been postponed for months, cancelled as patients have been wheeled into surgery or prepared for surgery anyway. And in at least one case, a patient has died while on the waiting list. But while there are 8 ICU beds in the hospital, and that is up from 6, even the Southern DHB CEO, Chris Fleming, has told us that's not enough yet. In a few minutes, we'll hear from Labour's health spokesperson, David Carter, who's also a local MP. He says the hospital is in desperate need of an upgrade and the intensive care unit is at least 10 beds short. But first, Bridget Burke reports on the stories of 3 Dunedin hospital patients, and she begins with Bridget Telfer and her father, Merv.
He has been postponed 7 times.
7 times, and he was told in May he would need an urgent double bypass.
16th of May, he was told it was urgent and they hoped to have it done in 30 days. And what he was told was that Yes, he definitely needs a heart valve replacement. He definitely needs a double bypass, but once they get in, it could be triple, it could be quadruple, they won't actually know, and that his arteries were 80% blocked.
Okay, so he was told that in May, and since then it's been postponed 7 times, including twice after he was admitted to hospital.
Yep. So what's happening in Dad's case is apparently they are doing, we don't know how many, but some operations. Dad's operation has now been scheduled for the 4th of August at Mercy Hospital, which is our private hospital. So whilst that's great for my father, it's still not going to have everybody seen to. It doesn't address the fact that there's other people waiting on lists in all sorts of areas that require urgent surgery. And to me, it's completely the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. And I know it all comes down to money, but how can it be cost effective when you're having people spending the night in hospital, you're having nurses attend to them, you've got staff ringing and reorganising, now you're paying God knows how much money to be seen at a private hospital? Like, you know, none of it makes sense to me. And meanwhile, the lists grow longer.
68-year-old South Dunedin man Owen Glover suffered a heart attack 3 years ago. His daughter Donna says her father's heart surgery was postponed 4 times last year.
They just kept sending letters saying, unfortunately, your surgery has been, delayed or put off or whatever. It will now be happening on whatever date, But yeah, 4 times it was cancelled.
And the first appointment was February that was cancelled?
Yeah, and then March, and then April, and then July.
And then he died in August?
And then he died at the beginning of August, and they had said that he would definitely be in towards the end of August for the surgery, but of course, obviously, we didn't get that far.
Donna says after not hearing from her father for a few days, her brother-in-law went round to see him at home last August to check on him.
He took the door off the track and went in and was yelling out and couldn't find him, and walked into the bathroom and then, walked through into his bedroom, and he was dead on the floor. And I just said to Pip, the thing, not only is the cancellation of all the surgeries bloody frustrating. I mean, obviously it's come to the worst, scenario occurred, obviously. But he obviously, he died alone, because they wouldn't get their shit together, so to speak, and sort it out.
Kelly Gibbs's 13-year-old daughter Amber spent the evening of the 9th of July in Dunedin Hospital prepping for spinal surgery for her scoliosis.
We had her all gowned up, ready to go, and the next minute the surgeon comes into the room and says to us, "We're sorry, but the surgery has to be postponed because a young guy who's had a heart attack has taken Amber's bed in ICU and they're needing a triple bypass."
Kelly says her husband and parents all took time off work to help care for Amber in her recovery and for the couple's other children. But a lack of an ICU bed for their daughter put that on hold.
Amber's got a lot of things wrong with her. She's actually got microcephaly, scoliosis, cerebral palsy, epilepsy, developmental delay, and she has asthma. So Amber's bound to a wheelchair for the rest of her life. She can't walk, she can't talk. She is totally reliant upon us, 100%. She's a 13-year-old girl. Even though she's physically, she's mentally, she's okay. She knows what's going on around her. She knows people. She knows animals. She knows her name. She's mentally, she's good. She knows what's going on around her. She's physically stuck in this body and can't do a thing.
Kelly says because of her daughter's fragile condition, the surgery had been planned for a long time and there were risks.
Obviously, so that we could get everyone, because it's a major surgery and there's a lot of risk for my wee girl. So obviously everyone wanted to be here and to be support and travelled from Invercargill to be here, taking time off work to be here, because it's hard work with the surgery. We have 3 other children as well. So the going backwards and forwards to hospital with other children, and the fact that we have to supply our own meals now because only the patients in hospital get fed. It's a big rigmarole anyway, having to stay in the hospital, let alone being really let down and the surgery not going ahead.
The couple has been told Amber's surgery will happen this year, but has not been given a date. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
Well, David Clark is both a Dunedin MP and Labour's health spokesperson. He believes Dunedin Hospital's intensive care unit needs at least 18 beds. That's 10 more than it currently has, although the number is going up to 10.
The clinicians that I've spoken with have told me that they are deeply concerned about the lack of ICU beds and the effect that that's having on the ability for surgeons to do their work in the hospital.
Of course, there should be, by now, well underway, a new hospital, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is the most frustrating thing for people across the South Island, particularly in the Otago and Southland areas. This hospital rebuild has been needed for a long time. And before the last election in 2014, I became concerned about the delays and asked Tony Ryle, who was then the Health Minister, when there would be a final business case to Cabinet for a hospital rebuild. And at that stage in 2014, he told me it would be there by the end of the year in 2014, after the election, but by the end of 2014. And of course, now there is no business case yet finished, and we're told that it will actually be 2018 before the business case is finished. So technically, the hospital is further away now than it was in 2014, and that's causing immense frustration locally, particularly as the hospital itself is degrading over time. The asbestos problems are becoming more apparent. People cannot access their medical records. People are having to go in hazmat suits to bring back medical records. The operating theatres are leaking, and surgery is being affected by that, and at times it's been cancelled in the past because of leaking operating theatres. There's spouting on the ground level in an 8th-floor building because water is finding its way down through the cracks of the building to the insides of the first floor, and areas of the hospital are cordoned off where patients and staff just cannot go. It's getting more and more dire week by week, and yet the Ministry of Health is not playing ball on a rebuild and on reasonable timeframes and putting the capital up front. And the people locally, of course, are incredibly worried about the situation.
In the meantime, there does seem to be an issue around a lack of ICU beds. There do seem to be delays. Are you worried that patient well-being and indeed lives are being put at risk?
I am worried about patient well-being and the fact that people are waiting long times for surgery. They're waiting long times for scans and things as well. It does feel like in the interim there needs to be other solutions put in place to clear the backlog of elective surgeries and other surgeries. And of course, all of this is difficult because it's not easy to transport people long distances for many of these things. That's why we have hospitals in each region so that people can access care locally, so that their families can be there to support them. It's all, in my view, cumulative problem that comes from underfunding the health system for so long. And, that's why we in the Labour Party have come to the view that we actually need to prioritise public health care above the tax cuts that the government is hanging out in the election year. We think there's a desperate problem here that needs to be addressed.
It's David Clark, who is both Labour's Dunedin North MP and the party's health spokesperson talking to us earlier today. It's coming up to 18 minutes past 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. The British Foreign Secretary got up close and personal with some of New Zealand's endangered fauna today, and we're not talking about the country's politicians. Boris Johnson visited Zealandia in Wellington this afternoon for the last official engagement of his 2-day charm offensive. He was shown around the wildlife sanctuary by Conservation Minister Maggie Barry.
Minister, thank you very much for having me here on this important anniversary day of your campaign of slaughter of rats and possums and stoats and other animals. And I understand the reasons why you do it. I don't think people actually grasp the threat to birds that these little mammals can pose. And I'm sure what you're doing is done in an entirely humane and dignified way, and they die with a smile on their faces.
My God, he just talks a lot of really interesting stuff, doesn't he? Earlier, Mr Johnson met with the Prime Minister Bill English and the Foreign Minister Jerry Brownlee. At the top of the agenda for the formal talks was the relationship and the reshaping of it between the two countries as the UK withdraws from the European Union. Boris Johnson says Britain benefits from being open to talent, and it hugely values New Zealand as being part of that.
On the ancestry visas and the overseas experience and stuff like that, we will want to maintain a regime that is at least as attractive as the current regime, and we will want to maintain a policy of openness and engagement. If I can just make one thing absolutely clear, I say this when I'm blue in the face. Brexit was not, will not be about Britain turning away from the world. On the contrary, it is about us wanting to, of course, to keep great relations with our European friends and partners and to do a great free trade deal with them. But it is also about rediscovering and intensifying friendships and partnerships around the world.
Jerry Brownlee says it's clear that Brexit does not mean any weakening of the relationship between New Zealand and the UK. He told reporters after the meeting that it will be some time before a trade deal is struck between New Zealand and Britain.
Well, they have to formally exit the European Union before they can engage in those discussions. And they've got 9 pieces of legislation to get through their Parliament to give effect to that. But clearly, alongside their arrangements for exit, which will, of course, involve a lot of trade that they have inside the European Union, they'll be thinking about how they expand those opportunities. We also have preferential access into the EU, and some of that is obviously going into the United Kingdom. So they have said, yes, they'll look at how they preserve that for us as well.
Foreign Minister Jerry Brownlee speaking after his meeting with Boris Johnson. Stress levels are high for Otago farmers, with floodwaters still yet to subside. Much of the low-lying areas were submerged after the Tairi riverbank and local waterways breached their banks. So the Tairi River and local waterways breached their banks at the weekend, with the farming plains bearing the brunt of the flooding. Huge amounts of water in some areas. The deluge comes at a tricky time, particularly for dairy farmers, some of whom have already started calving. Our reporter Tom Furley went to talk to them today.
4 days on, half of Simon Andrews' farm remains underwater, with up to 30 paddocks unusable.
Some of our paddocks are up to 3 feet deep, and they're paddocks that have never flooded before. Yeah, so it'd be, I'd say, 60, 70 Olympic-sized swimming pools sitting in our paddocks.
Much of the region is in the same boat.
I stayed on farm for 2 days because I was just too sad to, I didn't want to go out and look around other places because it just brings it all back to you. It's like, well, I'm bad, but look at this guy. Go another 2 k's up the road and it's like, oh my God, look at this guy. It's pretty heartbreaking when you go around and you see all the work that people have done on their farms over the last couple of years, and it's all just been wrecked within 24 hours.
Simon Andrews says flooding is common in the area, but some of his paddocks have never flooded before, and there's nowhere for the water to go. He says something needs to be done around flood protection.
Every year they've got a different scenario for it. It's a 10-year flood, it's a 20-year flood, it's a 100-year flood. It's flooding, so how about getting onto the problem and sorting out the issue? That seems to be the easiest way to solve it, but where do you start?
Only the highest points of Brian Wiley's 220-hectare farm are becoming visible above the water, while the rest remains submerged. He only started there in June.
We knew we were on a farm that could flood, so we were fully warned.
Yeah, I mean, did you expect it to be like that?
Hell no, not like it went. No. And I think, listening to locals, this is the worst since the 80s. So the 80s flood was the big one, and that went through the house that we are currently in, and we were still a good 2 feet away from the door, so we're lucky. Dodged a bullet.
However, Brian Wiley is pragmatic about the flooding.
We're on the other side of the wall, so we are in the designated flood zone. So we're the tap, well, the bucket. So yeah, that's life. We'll move on. This will go away, and the grass will grow.
Caleb Holmes has enough feed for his 600 cows, but 80% of his 250-hectare farm is underwater, with the rest of it too saturated to be of use. He says it'll be 2 weeks at least before things dry out, but he's grateful for the timing of his calving.
We calve a wee bit later, luckily. Yeah, we had one. Our first one yesterday was about it. So, yeah, that was probably our biggest blessing. It's not in a month's time. It could have been way worse.
Federated farmers have opened a helpline and are asking anyone who can offer grazing to get in touch. Community meetings were held across the region today for farmers to touch base with industry bodies about what's needed and the support available. Around 40 turned up to one in Henley. Richard Kite from RNZ says there are few who won't be affected on the Taieri Plains, so farmers need to help each other out.
I think the main message is from farmers to farmers, actually, having that plan and also ticking things off every day so you actually feel you're getting somewhere and achieving something.
Richard Kite says it's a close community and many have dealt with floods before. In Dunedin for Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
Well, from the flooding in Otago to a social Kava drinking club in Auckland, which has come under fire from some Pacific people. The multicultural group meets up for a drink each week and is part of a trend that's seen Kava go beyond its Pacific roots. But as Laura Tupou reports, not everyone is happy about Kava going mainstream.
It's the fiery drink that's got social media users hot under the collar. The Kava Society has been accused of appropriating a Pacific tradition, stripping Kava of its cultural roots. But one of its founding members, Zbigniew Dumienski, is defending the group. He says his initial interest in Kava was sparked while he spent time in the Cook Islands and Niue for research.
These are the only two countries in the South Pacific where Kava was basically eradicated by the missionaries, and paradoxically that's where I learned about Kava. So I was really interested to learn more about the reasons why it was eradicated, why it no longer existed in the culture.
Zbigniew Dumienski says he brought some Kava back to New Zealand and started drinking it with friends. He says the group doesn't pretend to follow any rituals or ceremonies and thinks it might be worse if they did. The multicultural group meets once a week and samples Kava from different islands in the Pacific.
Each variety offers a slightly different effect, has a different flavour. So we drink a lot of Hawaiian Kava, which we really like, but sometimes also get Kava from Vanuatu, Tonga, a few other places.
But that hasn't appeased Fijian teacher Emmeline Matangi. She's angry about the group because she says Kava sits so deeply in Fijian culture and tradition.
Just to see people drinking out of like protein shakers and passing it around like it's water or a protein shake that they'd have before the gym was really offensive in my eyes.
She says that's a world away from how it's done in Fiji, where they grow, dry and pound Kava before mixing it in a tanoa or Kava bowl. It's then consumed as part of a ceremony with high chiefs and people of status.
Also, like the smaller versions of those ceremonies where just families drink it. But even those ceremonies are quite traditional in the sense that there's special words that are used. There's special ways to present the Kava, like you give it to the oldest person first, that sort of thing. So, yeah, it was problematic to watch.
Ms Matangi acknowledges that the Kava Society may have researched the plant, but says there are better ways to try it respectfully.
Why not approach someone from the Pacific Islands that does it, that has, the contact to do it, and then go and join them and let them lead it, let them be the expert in that field.
Edmund Fehoko is a PhD student who did his Masters on Kava ceremonies for New Zealand-born Tongan men. He says although Tongan traditions are still practiced here, there has been a move towards more informal sessions, a format the Kava Society follows.
They do the same thing that we do. We don't go in and do a ritual. Heck no. We go in and, like everyone else, and just go sit there and drink and talk, share, offload our stories, offload our experiences, stuff that we can't share with our wives and partners and families, and that we can do that in the Kava circle. Pretty sure that's what the club was doing. And so I honestly think that they do the same thing that we do. It's just that the colour of the skin was a big difference.
But Ms Matangi says Kava is spiritual and people who aren't Pasifika who want to try the drink should respect that. Mō te hotaka o te ahiahi, ko Laura Tupou aho.
28 minutes past 6. Just before we go tonight, some feedback about the issue of ICU beds. Fascinating email from an anaesthetist who says the operational management of hospitals is not well developed. The estimated discharge date of individual patients is generally not updated on a daily basis, so that hospitals don't have an accurate idea of resources, including ICU beds, to which patients can be admitted. This leads to what is known as a book and hope operating strategy where patients are asked to come to hospital and then sent home again if resources are not available. This appears to be the case down south. This anaesthetist raises some other issues which we will look at as we further explore the story. Lots of people making shorter comments like no to pathetic tax cuts. John, put the money towards our overstretched health and education systems. So no ICU bed meant the surgeon did nothing that day. What a waste. And they have only now 8 intensive care beds in the Southern District Health Board. That size area has only now 8. What century does that derelict health board think it operates in? Who are useless people running those hospitals? Sack some management since they are not managing. Appalling. Thank you for your feedback. We really enjoy hearing from you. That is Checkpoint for this evening. You can listen to highlights from the program in late edition, which is on after 10 o'clock. In fact, highlights from all the programs, the excellent programs on national radio across the day. On behalf of our fantastic team, thank you for being with us. We really do appreciate the privilege of your company, and we hope that we are able to enjoy it again tomorrow night from 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Dunedin's Hospital's chief executive admits the hospital does not have enough intensive care unit beds and is apologising for delays to surgery. The Ministry for Primary Industries says it may never know how a new cattle disease has spread to a South Canterbury farm. Local councils are pushing for powers to register, desex and microchip cats to protect wildlife. And the Social Development Minister says benefit and accommodation allowance increases are helping low-income earners struggling with housing costs. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Grayson Gilmore marries electronic textures and unimagined sounds to his memorable and melodic songs on his new album, Otherness. I'm Nick Bollinger and I'll be reviewing it in the sampler. I'll be discussing the rich and absurd debut of Blessed Relief and classic Flying Nun